Hello and welcome to Flatting 101. I couldn't think of a more interesting name than that. I'm going to walk you through a couple of different ways of doing flats on comic art. For granted, the artist Zoo does pencils for me. I'll be honest with you, it's because we couldn't afford inks. But there we go, and I think they look quite nice. I've already prepared this page, and I'm just going to run you through a few different ways of doing your flats. The first thing I do is set a background layer, and that's really just above the bottom layer, so it's a layer at the bottom, and I've chosen a colour for it, which is that blue, and I've chosen it for a couple of reasons, just to follow on from the previous page that you can see there. And the reason for doing that first is because colours change according to what colour is surrounding them. So if you do the skin and the clothes and the hair and the furniture and whatnot, and then choose a background colour, you might run into some problems about how the skin begins to appear. It might become more red or more yellow or even more green, depending on what's behind it. Sometimes I change those colours and hues. I fiddle about with the palettes a little bit, just to fine tune it, but that gives me a good working base. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to flat Leslie's skin here in this panel, and I've chosen this panel because it's a nice big close-up and you'll be able to see it better. And there are a couple of different ways. I'm on a layer I've made and I've titled it Skin. I don't usually do that. I've really done that so that that's easy for you to see what's going on and which layer I'm on. Now you can use the lasso tool. I'll zoom in a bit, and you can go along the lines like this and select the areas that you want to be skin coloured. This isn't something I'm brilliant at because I don't do it very often, and this freeform lasso tool's quite easy to use. I think if you press shift it does a straight lasso, but I'm just doing this quickly just to give you an idea. So we choose the parts of her skin that we want to be skin coloured, obviously, and then I'll zoom back again, and then we just take the fill bucket and fill that. So that's method one. Let's deselect that. The other method is the polygon lasso tool, which is the straight tool, if I can get it selected, and this gives you just a little bit more control over it to go under the lines. Now I have to admit it's easier doing all of this with inked work because the inked lines will help you by hiding what's underneath them. So it's the same sort of principle. Select parts of the skin you want and then fill it with the fill bucket, the paint bucket. Now I'll show you how I do it. I have a pen that I use for flatting as a paintbrush. It's 100% opacity, 100% flow, and it doesn't react very much to pressure. So it will give me a fine line if my pressure's light, but on the whole it just gives me a nice big area. Now this isn't the way that most comic artists flat, but it is the way I prefer, and I think that's a number of things. It gives me a chance to really look at the art, decide on things like where's the light source, and if there's any lines. Like if you have a look here, there's a little smudge on the line art copy, so I've just gone up to the line art copy and I can just tidy that up a little bit. And you wouldn't necessarily notice that kind of thing if you were working with the polygon tool and selecting large areas. So that's one reason why I do it. It's not the only reason, but I guess it's just how each artist prefers to work. So I'm just gonna fill in this bit of her skin, and that's her arm because she's wearing a sleeveless top, so don't forget that. Although I've often found myself forgetting bits of hands and thumbs, and when you come to colour it and you notice that you've left a pattern. And I'm not being very precise around the hairline, and I'll show you why in a minute. So here, and I'm not being very precise around the panel lines either, but I'll explain that in a later tutorial perhaps. So then I go up. I've created a layer that I've called hair, and I always do the hair above the skin because it looks more natural if the hair is over the skin, because hair normally is over the skin. And I'm just going to colour in, and I'm being a bit more precise about following that line. And another reason for doing the background colour is that against a white or transparent background you wouldn't necessarily notice if you'd missed some bits. But when you do miss bits, it looks awful. With a coloured background, you notice more that you've left a little bit, a little hole in somebody's face or that kind of thing. Along the hairline, over the top, and that's her hair done. And then I make a new layer, which is her clothes. can see that little bit of her vest there. You've been fairly precise about where the skin is, and because this vest layer is underneath the skin layer, you don't have to be quite so precise about colouring it in. And if I hide the skin, you can see I've not been very precise at all. And this is the way I flat, because the next thing I'll do is perhaps colour the colour of the wall, which is a sort of green. And for things like walls and buildings and that kind of thing, I do use the polygon tool. You'll see I'm on a different layer underneath the clothes. I always work back down the layers. So because the wall's behind her, I'm doing the wall after the clothes, which needs to be in the front, and you can see that's appeared behind the skin and the clothes layer. And the other bit is ceiling, so you would select that. Actually, you can do that on a different layer. So that's the wall. I'll name that layer wall. And then make another layer which I'll name ceiling, which I've probably spelled wrong. And use the selection tool, and because it's on its own layer and it's underneath the wall, as long as you've been fairly precise on the wall layer, you don't have to be precise on the ceiling layer. And that looks a little bit light to me, so I'm going to go up to Image Adjustment, Hue Saturation, darken it slightly, a little bit more, and desaturate it slightly, and maybe give it just a tinge of yellow. And that's that panel flatted.